Sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold. Sometimes it's served with a delete key and a $40 million price tag. My name is Victoria Hayes, and this is the story of how I turned my corporate nightmare into their financial apocalypse. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, buried between spam about printer supplies and yet another company-wide memo about proper microwave etiquette. Subject line: Organizational restructuring. Action required. I should have known from the corporate doublespeak that my life was about to implode. I'd been at Meridian Dynamics for 8 years. 8 years of 60-hour weeks, missed dinners, and building their client acquisition department from a 2-person operation into a revenue-generating machine that brought in over $60 million annually. I was the architect of their success, the rainmaker they whispered about in board meetings. At least, that's what I thought. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in Conference Room B, the one with the broken air conditioning and the motivational posters that made everyone want to quit. I walked in expecting the promotion conversation we'd been dancing around for months. Instead, I found myself face-to-face with HR Director Patricia Mills and my soon-to-be former boss, Regional Manager James Crawford. "Victoria, please sit down," Patricia said, her smile as artificial as the plants in the lobby. She slid a manila folder across the scratched conference table. "We're restructuring the client acquisition department." I opened the folder. The words swam on the page. Effective immediately. Transition to junior account coordinator. Salary adjustment to reflect new responsibilities. Junior account coordinator, the same title I'd held 6 years ago, the same salary I'd outgrown before Obama left office. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "We discussed my promotion to senior director. You said it was just a matter of paperwork." James finally spoke, not meeting my eyes. "The company's priorities have shifted. We're streamlining operations, focusing on cost efficiency. We think you'll be a great fit for this new role." "New role?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This is a demotion. You're cutting my salary by $30,000 and stripping away all my responsibilities." Patricia's smile never wavered. "We prefer to think of it as right-sizing. The position comes with a $500 annual raise from your previous junior coordinator salary." $500. They were trying to spin a $30,000 pay cut as a raise by comparing it to a position I'd held in 2018. The audacity was almost impressive. "And if I don't accept this generous offer?" I asked. "Well," Patricia exchanged a glance with James, "we'd hate to lose you, but we understand if this new direction isn't aligned with your career goals." Corporate speak for take it or get out. They had me cornered, and they knew it. In their minds, I had 2 choices: accept the humiliation or clean out my desk. They underestimated me. I signed the papers. I took the demotion. I smiled and nodded and played the part of the gracious team player who understood that sometimes business decisions were difficult. I even thanked them for the opportunity to contribute in new ways. But as I walked back to my office, my former office, now being prepped for whoever they'd bring in to replace me, I was already formulating my plan. They wanted to play games? Fine. I'd been playing corporate games since before they knew what a P&L statement was. The first thing I did was analyze why this had happened. It didn't take long to piece together. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus Webb had been hired as the new vice president of sales. Marcus, with his Ivy League MBA and connections to the C-suite golf buddies. Marcus, who had immediately started making noise about optimizing human resources and eliminating redundancies. He'd looked at my department, seen the revenue numbers, and decided he could cut costs by hiring someone cheaper to do my job. Someone who'd work for half my salary and wouldn't push back when he took credit for their strategies. Someone disposable. What Marcus hadn't bothered to research was how I'd built those revenue streams. He saw the numbers, but not the relationships. He saw the contracts, but not the intricate web of trust and personal connections that made them possible. Most importantly, he had no idea that I'd been the primary architect of the Blackstone Industries contract, the $40 million 3-year deal that accounted for nearly 30% of Meridian's total revenue. The contract that was coming up for renewal in 6 months. I spent my first week as junior account coordinator doing junior coordinator things, filing reports, updating spreadsheets, sitting in on meetings where I was introduced as Victoria from our coordination team. The humiliation was intentional and complete. They wanted to break me, to make me quit on my own so they wouldn't have to pay unemployment. Instead, I used the time to observe, to plan, to document. Marcus had wasted no time moving into what used to be my office. He'd brought in his own furniture, hung his diplomas on the walls, and started scheduling calls with my former clients. Our former clients, I should say, since officially I was no longer involved in account management. But here's what Marcus didn't understand about client relationships. They're personal. You don't build $40 million partnerships with spreadsheets and quarterly reports. You build them with trust, with understanding your client's business better than they do sometimes, with being available at midnight when their systems crash and they need someone who can solve problems. Marcus tried to schedule his first meeting with Jonathan Blackstone, CEO of Blackstone Industries, for a Wednesday afternoon. Jonathan's assistant politely declined, suggesting they connect through Victoria first, as she handles all our strategic communications. I watched Marcus's face when he got that message. The confusion, then the irritation, then the slow realization that maybe the relationships he'd inherited weren't as transferable as he'd assumed. He called me into his office that afternoon. My old office, with my old view of the city skyline. "Victoria," he said, not looking up from his computer. "I need you to set up a meeting with the Blackstone people. Full team intro. Get everyone on the same page." "Of course," I replied. "What timeline are you thinking?" "This week. Strike while the iron's hot." I nodded and made notes in my little coordinator notebook. "I'll reach out to Jonathan's team and see what works with their schedule." What I didn't tell Marcus was that Jonathan Blackstone and I had been having informal conversations for months. Not about business, that would have been inappropriate given my employment situation, but about industry trends, market analysis, the kind of strategic discussions that happen between professionals who respect each other's expertise. Jonathan had been vocal about his frustration with companies that treated client relationships as interchangeable assets. He'd pulled contracts from 2 other firms in the past year for exactly that reason. The Blackstone Industries account wasn't just valuable because of its size, it was valuable because Jonathan was incredibly selective about his partnerships. I set up the meeting for the following Thursday. Marcus spent the entire week preparing, pulling together presentations and strategic documents. He even had the marketing team create a special folder with the Meridian Dynamics logo embossed in gold. The meeting lasted 17 minutes. I sat in the corner with my coordinator notebook, taking notes and watching Marcus pitch services to a man who'd been receiving those services excellently for 3 years. Jonathan listened politely, asked a few pointed questions about continuity and relationship management, and then wrapped up the meeting with a simple statement. "Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch about the renewal." Marcus was ecstatic. He sent an email to the entire sales team that afternoon, talking about securing client confidence and building on existing foundations. He had no idea he'd just been professionally dismissed. I knew because Jonathan caught my eye as he was leaving and gave me the slightest nod toward the hallway. I excused myself 5 minutes later and found him waiting by the elevators. "Victoria," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something directly. Are you still the strategic lead on our account?" I chose my words carefully. "I'm currently serving as Junior Account Coordinator. Marcus Webb is the VP overseeing strategic accounts." Jonathan's expression said everything. "I see. And you're comfortable with this arrangement?" "I serve in whatever capacity best supports our partnership," I replied. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "The contract renewal discussions will be interesting. I hope we can maintain the level of service we've grown accustomed to." After he left, I returned to my desk and opened my personal laptop. I had 6 months to document everything that was about to go wrong. The problems started small. Marcus began making changes to the Blackstone service model. Optimizations that looked good on paper but ignored the specific requirements Jonathan's team had communicated over years of relationship building. He switched their dedicated support line to the general queue. He moved their quarterly business reviews from in-person meetings to video calls. He assigned their day-to-day communication to rotating team members instead of maintaining consistent points of contact. Each change individually seemed minor. Together, they systematically dismantled everything that made Blackstone feel like a priority client. I documented every decision, every email, every client complaint that came through the coordination desk. As junior account coordinator, I was copied on communications, included in status meetings, privy to all the operational details that Marcus was too busy strategizing to pay attention to. 2 months into my new role, I was asked to prepare a report on client satisfaction metrics. The data was damning. Blackstone's satisfaction scores had dropped 15%. Their support ticket resolution time had doubled. 3 separate departments within their organization had submitted formal complaints about service quality. I compiled everything into a comprehensive analysis, complete with recommendations for corrective action. I submitted it to Marcus with a copy to Patricia in HR, as required by company policy for significant client concerns. Marcus scheduled a meeting to discuss the report. I expected him to be concerned, maybe frustrated that problems had developed so quickly. Instead, he was dismissive. Client satisfaction always dips during transition periods, he said, barely glancing at the charts I'd prepared. They'll adjust to the new processes. Blackstone's locked into a 3-year contract anyway. It's not like they can just walk away. That's when I realized Marcus didn't understand the contract structure at all. He'd seen the 3-year term and assumed it meant 3 years of guaranteed revenue. He hadn't read the termination clauses, the service level agreements, the performance benchmarks that gave Blackstone multiple exit ramps if Meridian failed to meet their obligations. I spent that evening reading through every page of the Blackstone contract. I'd helped negotiate it originally, but I wanted to understand every detail, every contingency, every possible scenario. What I found was even better than I'd hoped. The contract included a provision I'd insisted on during the original negotiations, a client satisfaction guarantee. If Blackstone's quarterly satisfaction ratings fell below 75% for 2 consecutive quarters, they could terminate the contract with 30 days' notice and no penalty. Marcus had let satisfaction drop to 68% in just 2 months. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Patricia Mills. As junior account coordinator, I technically didn't have the authority to escalate client concerns directly to executive leadership, but I could raise them through HR if I felt they represented potential compliance issues. Patricia, I said, settling into the uncomfortable chair across from her desk. I need to discuss the Blackstone Industries account. We may have a contract compliance issue. I walked her through the satisfaction metrics, the service level failures, the specific contract provisions that were being violated. I presented everything objectively, professionally, without editorial commentary about Marcus's management decisions. Patricia listened with growing concern. $40 million of annual revenue was nothing to take lightly, especially when the company had already committed to aggressive growth targets based on that guaranteed income. "What do you recommend?" she asked. "Immediate corrective action," I replied. "Restore the dedicated service model, assign consistent relationship managers, and schedule face-to-face meetings with their leadership team to address concerns directly. We probably have 30 to 60 days to turn this around before the satisfaction metrics trigger the termination clause." Patricia made notes and assured me she'd discuss the situation with Marcus immediately. I left the meeting confident that either Marcus would fix the problems or his failure to do so would be thoroughly documented through official channels. Marcus chose option 3, shoot the messenger. I was called back to conference room B the next afternoon. Same broken air conditioning, same motivational posters. This time Marcus was there with Patricia, and his expression was anything but friendly. "Victoria," Patricia began. "Marcus has raised some concerns about your performance in your current role. He feels you may be overstepping your responsibilities by conducting independent client analysis." I kept my expression neutral. I was asked to prepare satisfaction metrics as part of my coordination duties. The contract compliance issues became apparent during that analysis. Marcus leaned forward. "What I'm concerned about is whether you're able to adapt to your new position. You seem to still think you're running strategic accounts instead of providing coordination support. I'm simply trying to ensure our clients receive the service level they're contractually guaranteed. I replied. That's not your job anymore, Marcus said firmly. Your job is data entry and scheduling. I need to know you understand that. The threat was clear. Stay in your lane or find yourself completely out of a job. I nodded and apologized for any confusion about my role boundaries. I assured them I'd focus on coordination tasks and leave strategic decisions to the appropriate management level. As I walked back to my desk, I was already planning my next move. That weekend, I had lunch with Jonathan Blackstone. Not a business meeting, just two professionals who'd built a relationship over years of successful partnership. We met at his usual spot, a quiet restaurant downtown where we could talk without corporate oversight. I have to ask, Jonathan said after we'd ordered. What the hell is happening over there? My team is getting bounced between different support agents every week. The quarterly review got moved to some generic conference call, and now this web character wants to renegotiate our service package to optimize efficiency. I chose my words carefully. There have been some organizational changes. New leadership is implementing different operational approaches. Jonathan studied my face. Victoria, we've done $60 million of business together over 3 years. I think I've earned a straight answer. Are you still involved in our account management? Not in a strategic capacity, I admitted. I'm currently serving as a coordinator. A coordinator? Jonathan's voice was flat. They demoted you. I didn't respond directly, but my expression was answer enough. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, staring out the restaurant window at the city traffic. Finally, he spoke. You know, we're coming up on contract renewal. I've been getting calls from other firms, companies that understand the value of relationship-based partnerships. I'm sure you'll make the decision that's best for Blackstone Industries, I said carefully. Yes, he replied, I will. The following Monday, Marcus scheduled an all-hands meeting to discuss Q3 performance and Q4 objectives. The Blackstone account featured prominently in his presentation as an example of successful relationship optimization that was delivering improved margins through operational efficiency. He had no idea that Jonathan Blackstone had spent the weekend reviewing Meridian's contract performance and documenting service failures for his legal team. 3 weeks later, the letter arrived. I was at my coordinator desk when Patricia's assistant came looking for Marcus. He was in his office, door closed, on what sounded like an important call. She knocked twice before he answered, clearly irritated by the interruption. This just came by courier, she said, handing him an envelope with the Blackstone Industries letterhead. Marked urgent for your immediate attention. I couldn't see Marcus's face from my desk, but I didn't need to. The silence that followed, then the sound of his chair scraping back, then his voice. Get Patricia up here, now! 15 minutes later, Marcus, Patricia, and Regional Director David Kim were huddled in Marcus's office with the door closed. I could see them through the glass walls, their body language growing more agitated by the minute. The letter was brief and professionally devastating. Dear Meridian Dynamics, per the terms of our service agreement dated March 15, 2022, Blackstone Industries hereby provides 30 days notice of contract termination due to failure to maintain contractually required service levels. As documented in our quarterly satisfaction reports, service quality has fallen below the 75% threshold for 2 consecutive quarters, triggering the early termination provision outlined in Section 12.3 of our agreement. Our final payment will cover services through the termination date. We will not be exercising the renewal option for the subsequent contract period. Sincerely, Jonathan Blackstone, Chief Executive Officer. $40 million of annual revenue, gone, just like that. The meeting in Marcus's office lasted 2 hours. I watched through the glass as they made phone calls, reviewed documents, and engaged in what appeared to be increasingly heated discussions. David Kim looked like he was ready to have a heart attack. Patricia kept shaking her head. Marcus was sweating through his expensive shirt. Finally, the door opened and Marcus stormed out, heading straight for my desk. I need everything, he said without preamble. Every communication, every report, every piece of documentation related to the Blackstone account, and I need it now. I opened my coordinator files and began pulling documents. Would you like me to organize them chronologically or by category? I don't care how you organize them, just get me everything so I can figure out what went wrong. What went wrong? As if it were some mysterious force of nature instead of the predictable result of dismantling a carefully built relationship structure. I spent the next 3 hours compiling files. Every email, every report, every satisfaction survey, every service complaint, every recommendation that had been ignored. I organized everything chronologically and included a summary index for easy reference. Marcus disappeared into his office with the files and didn't emerge for the rest of the day. The next morning, I was called into David Kim's office. David was regional director, Marcus's boss, and the man who would ultimately be held responsible for losing Meridian's second-largest client. Victoria, David said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. I need to understand exactly what happened with Blackstone. Walk me through the timeline. I had been preparing for this conversation for months. I opened my notebook and began methodically detailing every decision, every process change, every client complaint, and every recommendation that had been dismissed or ignored. I presented the information objectively, without editorial commentary, focusing on facts and outcomes. David listened without interruption, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Your recommendations, he said finally. The ones you submitted to Marcus about restoring the dedicated service model. When did you submit those? October 15th, I replied, approximately 6 weeks before the termination notice. And Marcus's response? He felt the client would adjust to the new processes and that the contract terms provided sufficient security. David made more notes. Victoria, I need to ask you directly. In your professional opinion, could this termination have been prevented? I met his eyes steadily. Yes. If the recommended corrective actions had been implemented within 30 to 45 days of the initial service quality decline, we likely could have restored client satisfaction to acceptable levels. David nodded slowly. Thank you. That's all I need right now. As I reached the door, he called after me. Victoria, you did good work documenting all of this. Very thorough. That afternoon, Marcus was called into David Kim's office. The meeting lasted over an hour. When Marcus finally emerged, his face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly. He cleaned out his desk that evening. The official announcement came the next morning. Effective immediately, Marcus Webb has decided to pursue other opportunities. We thank him for his contributions and wish him success in his future endeavors. Corporate speak for fired. But the damage was done. $40 million in annual revenue doesn't get replaced overnight. The loss triggered a cascade of consequences: missed quarterly targets, emergency budget cuts, delayed expansion plans, and very uncomfortable conversations with Meridian's board of directors. I kept my head down and continued my coordination duties, watching the aftermath unfold from my junior-level perspective. It was fascinating to observe how the loss of a single contract could ripple through every department of a mid-sized company. 2 weeks after Marcus's departure, Patricia Mills called me into her office. Victoria, she said, settling behind her desk with a manila folder that looked disturbingly familiar. We need to discuss your role going forward. Here we go, I thought. Another reorganization, another demotion, another creative way to push me toward the exit. The Blackstone situation has prompted us to reevaluate our account management structure. Patricia continued. We're particularly concerned about relationship continuity and client satisfaction protocols. I nodded and waited for the other shoe to drop. We'd like to offer you the position of Senior Director of Client Relations, reporting directly to David Kim. The role would include oversight of all strategic accounts, with specific focus on relationship management and satisfaction metrics. I kept my expression neutral while my mind raced. Senior Director. Direct report to the regional director. Everything I'd been promised before this nightmare started. plus expanded authority and oversight responsibilities. The position comes with a 35% salary increase from your current coordinator wage, Patricia added, plus performance bonuses tied to client retention metrics. 35% increase from coordinator salary. Still less than I'd been making before the demotion, but close enough to feel like restoration rather than reward. I'm honored by the offer, I said carefully. What would be the timeline for this transition? Immediate. We need someone who understands our client relationships to begin damage control efforts as soon as possible. I pretended to consider the offer, as if there were any question about my response. I accept. Patricia smiled, a genuine smile this time, not the artificial HR expression I'd grown accustomed to. Excellent. David will want to meet with you this afternoon to discuss priorities and strategic direction. As I walked back to my desk to begin packing up my coordinator materials, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been the successful department head who'd built Meridian's client acquisition program from nothing. Then I'd been demoted, humiliated, and nearly pushed out entirely. Now I was being promoted to a position with even more authority than I'd originally held, specifically because my expertise was the only thing that could salvage the mess created by my replacement. The irony was almost too perfect. My first act as senior director was to call Jonathan Blackstone. "Jonathan," I said when he answered. "This is Victoria Hayes from Meridian Dynamics. I wanted to let you know about some organizational changes that might interest you." "Victoria?" His voice warmed noticeably. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I assume this is about the contract termination." "Actually, it's about the future. I've been promoted to Senior Director of Client Relations. I'll be overseeing all strategic partnerships moving forward, with specific focus on the kind of relationship-based service model we develop together." Jonathan was quiet for a moment. "Interesting timing." "Indeed. I was wondering if you might be open to a conversation about what strategic partnership could look like under the new structure." "You know," Jonathan said slowly, "we haven't signed with another firm yet. The termination doesn't take effect for another 2 weeks. If Meridian were to demonstrate genuine commitment to restoring our previous service model, I'm prepared to make some very specific guarantees about service delivery," I replied, "including personal oversight and dedicated relationship management. In that case, why don't you come by tomorrow afternoon? Let's discuss what a renewed partnership might look like." I hung up the phone and immediately began drafting a proposal that would not only restore the Blackstone contract, but expand it. $40 million in annual revenue was just the beginning. With the right approach, the right relationship management, and the right incentive structure, that number could grow significantly. 3 weeks later, I was back in Conference Room B. Same broken air conditioning, same motivational posters. But this time, I was the one sitting at the head of the table, presenting the renewed Blackstone Industries contract to David Kim and the executive team. $52 million annually for the next 4 years, I announced, with built-in expansion options that could push it to $70 million by year 3. The room was silent as they absorbed the numbers. Not only had we recovered the lost revenue, we'd increased it by 30% and secured it for twice as long as the original contract. "How?" David asked simply. "Relationship management," I replied. "Jonathan Blackstone doesn't just want a vendor. He wants a strategic partner who understands his business and is invested in his success." The expanded contract includes quarterly strategic planning sessions, dedicated account resources, and performance bonuses tied to Blackstone's business outcomes. "And he's comfortable with you as the primary relationship manager?" David asked. "He insisted on it," I said. "The contract includes specific provisions requiring my personal involvement in all strategic communications." David Kim smiled for the first time since the original termination notice had arrived. "Outstanding work, Victoria. This is exactly the kind of innovative partnership development we need to be focusing on." As the meeting wrapped up and people filed out, I remained behind to gather my presentation materials. The empty conference room felt different now. Instead of the place where my career had nearly ended, it had become the launching point for something much bigger. 6 months earlier, I'd walked into this room expecting a promotion and left with a devastating demotion. They'd tried to break me with humiliation, salary cuts, and professional disrespect. They'd assumed I would either quit in frustration or accept my diminished role quietly. Instead, I'd used their underestimation as camouflage. I'd documented their failures, maintained crucial relationships, and positioned myself as the only person who could solve the crisis they'd created. When the $40 million bill came due for their arrogance, I was ready with the solution. The final irony was that my new position, Senior Director of Client Relations, came with broader authority and higher compensation than anything I'd been offered before the demotion. Not only had I recovered from their attempt to diminish me, I'd leveraged it into the biggest promotion of my career. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destruction. Sometimes it's about proving that their attempt to destroy you only made you stronger, smarter, and more valuable than they ever imagined. I packed up my presentation materials and headed back to my office. My real office this time, with windows facing the city skyline and space for the strategic planning sessions that would drive Meridian's growth for years to come. As I settled behind my new desk, I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to Jonathan Blackstone. We had $70 million worth of business to plan, and I intended to deliver results that would make Marcus Webb's optimization strategies look like the amateur hour they'd always been. The best part? Every success, every expanded contract, every satisfied client would serve as a permanent reminder that Victoria Hayes couldn't be eliminated, diminished, or replaced. They'd tried to erase me for a $500 raise, and I'd erase their biggest client in response. Now I was going to build something so successful, so profitable, and so essential to Meridian's future that no one would ever again make the mistake of underestimating what I bring to the table. That's how you turn a demotion into domination. That's how you convert humiliation into leverage. And that's how you prove that sometimes the best revenge is simply being irreplaceably excellent at what you do. The war was over. I'd won. And the victory was going to pay dividends for years to come.